Can I agree that it's weird to call a sport football while you play it 99% with your hands? Actually, sorry, but I can't agree with that, but I will tell you why. This is Canadian football, and they're actually playing against Great Britain. This is Gaelic football. This is Aussie rules football. This is rugby football. You might know it as just rugby. But their version of the FA is called the Rugby Football Union because that's the full name of the sport. So of all those different kinds of football that involve handling the ball, why is it just this one that bothers you? In fact, this is kind of the odd one out for not allowing handling the ball besides the goalkeeper. You see, if you know the actual history of football, which I go into a lot more detail about in this video on my channel at Prof. Woody Mr. Ford. It has a lot more information than I'm about to tell you, so please check it out. But the history goes back to the earliest descriptions of ball games in England, which include the game played at Shrovetide just before Lent, which they still play today and looks like this. And you can see there's not a lot of kicking going on. The earliest records of the term football go back to the early 1300s in London when the mayor would ban the game because they were mob games wreaking havoc. And these mob games went for miles and lasted hours or days, so the balls were very sturdy and hardy, some of them even made of wood. Not exactly something most people would want to kick around. All that opposition and banning of crazy mob games led to the rules-based games, which had it more orderly. One of those early sets of rules were drawn up in 1863. They weren't the first set of rules, but they were the ones that would become the soccer we know today. In fact, those rules come from the history of the Football Association, where the FA itself says that original version of the game was made to include handling and dribbling. And while eventually they would settle on mostly just kicking, the fair catch rule did still exist for a few years. But 18 years before that, in 1845, some students at the rugby school wrote down the laws of football played at rugby school. They didn't create a new sport called rugby. They were just playing football, and they wrote down the rules as it was played at rugby school. And in Canada, what's recognized as the first official game of Canadian football was in 1861 at the University of Toronto, using very similar rules to rugby, which involved handling the ball. It wasn't until 1869 that we see the first official game of American football, which Rutgers won, by the way, but that was basically using association football rules. In fact, carrying or throwing the ball wasn't even allowed. It wasn't until 1874 when McGill University from Canada visited Harvard University in the US, and they played both versions of football, and the Harvard students liked the Canadian version so much, they picked up the ball and never put it down again. And that's how we got this football, because it comes from this football, or at least the same source as this football, which comes from the same source as this football, which comes from the same source as this football. All these different footballs are still called football because they come from the same source. We see it in the historical evidence and the fact that the balls were so hard. It's actually called football because it was played on foot rather than horseback, not because they kicked the ball with their feet.